All right, let's call to order this Thursday, February 22nd meeting of the Knox County Audit Committee. And it's not going to be Kim. It's going to do roll call. It'll be Haley.
Mr. Morrison.
Here.
Mr. Warren. Mr. Beeler. Mr. Jay.
Here.
Mr. Schoonmaker.
Here.
Richie will not be here today, and Matt's on his way. So if we need it for anything else, I think we can go ahead and approve the minutes, though, with 3 of us of the 5 here. So that seems to be the case. All right, let's do the pledge first.
If you are able, please stand and salute our nation's flag for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Skipping the January meeting's gotten me all confused here with everything. So the next item is to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, which in this case is the December 11th meeting. We had one for the January 17th meeting, but that got canceled, so I assume those minutes don't count. So since we never used it, so do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the December 11th meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay? Okay, ayes have it. Just a few comments on getting everything before we start. We've tried to make it a point not to do the school fund report and the CAFR in the same meeting because it takes a little more time. And we had it planned so well, but then January kind of messed us up on that because Ted was ready for the schools back in January. So anyway, the first item under number 5A is key points under the CAFR. And Chris, you say Perry's going to run that for you? Or is he leaving?
I'm on.
And
All right. This is, okay, I'm Perry Benshaw from Knox County Finance. This is only a 350-page document, so we'll start with page 1.
that's got it.
Now, the kind of the main highlights in any of these documents is I like to start with is the MD&A, which, kind of talks about, well, I should probably start with, this is Roman numeral 14. That's the audit report. Ted likes to make sure we mention that it's a good, clean audit. So and you can kind of see that that's the case, as it always is. We always have a good working relationship with Pew and Company, and it's always works out well. But right after that, it starts the MD&A, and that's really just a summary of all of the different pieces and parts of this whole thing in the whole county. And it's kind of a nice way to ease into it. After that, you get into all of the financial statements and schedules and notes, and it's all the detail. But one thing that's highlighted that I like, is the MD&A. So you can kind of look at a few of the key points down here. Like in the primary government, we had net position increased by 13 million. That's obviously a good indicator. The government funds report had total fund balances, and this is all the.
Could you just reference the page number
for
the document? Thank you.
This is Roman numeral page 17, right after the auditor's report. So going on down here, a couple of line items. The governmental funds total fund balance was $203 million. That's very healthy for our county, our size, which was, as you can see, an increase of $29 million from the prior year. A couple other interesting notes on this page. Total bond indebtedness that the county holds, $727 million. That's always, it's a good number to look at and you see where we stand. But and there's obviously notes and schedules in the back that detail out every little bit of what makes that up. Let's see. Property tax rate, you'll see down there, it's 1.554. That's after the reappraisal that occurred back at the end of 22, so it's FY 23. Let's see, what else? There's a couple of good statements in here. If you turn a couple of pages, Roman numeral 20, it kind of gives a summary of the government-wide financial statements and where, just some of the highlighted pieces, and you can kind of see where they stand. You'll notice that net position on government-wide financial statements is a deficit, but that's because of the way the government works. The county has to take on the debt that the schools system has the assets. So, and there's actually a note in here that we'd like to put in that tells what happens if we didn't have to do that. And that's kind of on the next page. But so you just kind of see we try to explain everything that looks a little unusual, if that makes sense. And you can see some of the other schedules just going on these different pages that kind of show the different fund balances and net position of the different funds. Let's see. And that's, like I say, that's the MD&A. So that kind of goes through some of the highlights of the different funds. Getting on past that, going on to after the first tab of basic financial statements, you'll see page 1, actual number 1. And that's the government-wide financial statements for the net position of Knox County. And that's all of the funds, including the schools and on all the component units. And so you can kind of see the bottom line of that. The schools support, as you can see, the very bottom line net position of Knox County Schools is $743 million. So that's where they're getting the assets and can maintain, the total net position, which is in the very last column. And it makes it look, you can kind of see the total system. The next page is just the statement of activities for the government-wide, which it's kind of like an income statement. And it just kind of shows exactly where everything flowed in and out, revenue and expense-wise. Other than that, we get into the fund statements, which is a little more what people are used to seeing because it makes a little more sense. And after that, there's, you got the various notes and the required statements. So other than that and getting into all the details and all the weeds of this, I don't know how much you want to see, but if there's any questions so far on any of that, we can.
I know as every year goes along, and last fiscal year, y'all are giving monthly updates, and so by the time the end of the year comes around, and then you get everything wrapped together by the end of November or whatever. So, were there any adjustment changes from what you would have reported up through June of last year before, say, either the reviews or the audit started?
We're adjusting after the year end. We're adjusting our county books all the way up until almost to the end of the audit, just to make sure that we have everything in line.
Okay, and maybe I'm not thinking of routine things, but any things that I might call adjustments or findings that came up.
I don't think there was any major, well, there were a few major adjustments.
Just stuff done for like leases and Savitas.
Yeah, just the kind of the normal closeout system, that we do. Nothing that related into findings or anything like that. So we're good on that. Good, keep that clean. But other than that, no.
Okay.
But yeah, we don't close. I mean, June 30 is our year cutoff, but
Right.
it's probably we're working on keeping this thing, keeping everything up to date as much as possible, so we can have good year-end numbers. And we're working on closing up until the end of in November, December. It just
Right.
takes that long to get
And I
everything.
think we see some of those even after June 30th. I mean, y'all
Yeah.
give some updates if the
It
numbers.
just takes that long to wrap everything up in a
As
county
they're
this
changing.
size.
So what else in here of note would you think of significance to point out?
Let's see. Other than that, you might want to look, actually, all the way towards the back, because the school system, it's a component unit of the county, but it's a major component unit. Way in the back where it has the component unit Board of Education, that does go into talking about the individual funds that are related just to the schools. So, and you can see that way back here. I'm on page 248. It's after that second to last tab. And this is the statement that has net position. This is the government-wide statement, we call it, which is full accrual accounting. The other ones are just the fund statements. But this one, you can see, and this one kind of wrapped up to the first notes in the MD&A, total $743 million in total net position for the schools. And that's very, very healthy, obviously. So these are some of the best highlights. Now, if you go to page 250, that's the fund statements of the schools. And you can kind of see how they all line up and the results that they had. And that's probably a key item because, like I say, the school system is actually, it's funny when you have a component unit of the county, but the component unit is bigger than the county.
Yeah.
So those statements are probably key items to kind of take a look at when you're focusing on the whole county.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question?
Yes, sir, Commissioner
Thank you.
Schoonmaker.
On your page 248, under the first caption under assets where it says other capital assets of the 421 million, is that just the school system's assets or is that, okay? And then on the first pages we looked at where it said capital assets, that's the county's assets, correct?
Right. If you went back to page 1,
Yeah.
you would see this exact column about 5 columns into that page. It's the same
Yeah.
one. So in total, this is just the schools.
Correct. So total, we'd have about 900 million in assets, give or take?
Yeah, I think it's close to $1 billion.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other than that, back into the statistical section, that's just a bunch of, a lot of this is just required reporting that we do to submit to the GFOA for our annual award for excellence that we've been getting for the last 27 years. So a lot of this is just required information that we have to put in these reports. So if there's, other than that, that's like I say, the MD&A is really, to me, kind of the key highlights of the whole report. But
Right, and I tried some of it again last night, but at least you understand enough. It starts off general and then breaks it down a little more, and then you've got way back here in the book of all sorts of detail behind it. So.
right, and we have to, everything in here is required to be put in here.
Okay.
So
Well, I know y'all went over some of this yesterday, so Commissioner Schoonmaker, you have anything else?
Yeah, kind of to follow up his question, if you have nothing to do one evening and you wanted to zero in on a few pages, anything you would recommend that we?
well, like I say, debt and liabilities are. Debt and capital assets are kind of the bigger items in these reports. Back on page 59 and 60 is the kind of the summary of all the debt, which is kind of interesting for most. And I think it's page,
So he can give us the pages numbers without even thinking about them.
yeah, I've looked at this a couple of times.
I believe that's a stretch.
And when you're talking debt, are you talking bonded debt plus
Yeah.
any other debt, or is it?
Right. There's mostly it's bonded debt. We do have a few loans and some actual old-time capital leases.
Okay.
Yeah, the capital assets starts on page 47. So that's the schedules that are probably, I would say, most interesting because that's the bigger numbers related to this report.
And also, it's encouraging to see on page 280 that our revenue continues to grow every year in every category.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess, yeah, you're right. I should have pointed that out. But
And, I mean, even look at the lodging tax. That's pretty amazing.
280?
280, yeah, the middle columns.
And
Even
those-
the business tax.
And those are good because those are 10-year schedules, and you can kind of see the trends the county has gone through over the years.
Yeah.
So again, those are all required. We have to put in 10 years. But it's a good little snapshot, of how the county's done over the time.
I agree.
So,
But don't I remember hearing that we're finally looking at things getting a little flatter this year?
yes, that's
budget purposes?
That's been the common theme. The state has kind of put out kind of a flat projection for the year. So we'll see, and we have to budget accordingly.
Right.
To projections of what we have and what we've known. So, but other than that, we just have to see how it turns out, and hopefully we'll continue to do well. That's all we
Well,
can.
and y'all done well with that, in particular back during COVID when the state was trying to give you different projections of, I think
Yeah,
they
it's-
expected a lot more, so.
It's a challenge, and Chris and our budget director, Jennifer Bodie, do a great job putting all that together.
All right, Commissioner Jay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barry, on 280, I'm sure it's in this document somewhere in this book, but what are the other local taxes? What are some of the things that are inside of that line item? I know there's a mineral tax.
I think the gas tax is in there. See, right off the top of my head, I think that's mostly, and there may be some.
I'm positive it's in here somewhere. I was,
Well, and we do try to group some of these together, so when you get into some of the smaller miscellaneous taxes.
okay,
But yeah,
I'll find it. Thank you.
okay.
Pardon me? Oh. All right, any other questions? Matt, sorry we got your time mixed up. I'm glad you're here, so. No, it got changed, so.
Well, then if there's ever any, questions come up later, I know John occasionally calls or whatever.
Right.
And we're always here to help answer any of those questions as they come up, whatever you need to see.
All right.
Okay?
We'll appreciate it. And
All right.
And we'll come up, if we have more, we'll come up with them, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Okay, so we are now moving on to I'll point out that we're deferring to the March meeting, item 5B, and we can talk about that a little bit towards the end of the agenda here, because when do we want to come back next month to review that? It's probably going to be ready within the week, but anyway, so that's I wanted to leave it on here so we would know that that's still part of the what needs to be discussed. So now we're on to item 6, which is Ted Holtz and the school folks back there on the internal school activity funds audit report. You got the floor, Ted.
Thank you. Ted Holtz, Pew CPAs, Knox County resident. And start off for Matt's sake, I was prepared to be here at 3 o'clock today until around 11 o'clock today. I took another look at the agenda, so. Okay.
It's all January's fault.
Yes. A quick update on the primary audits for Knox County. Of course, the ACFR has been submitted in January, and you just went over it. The single audit compliance report is in the final stages. We have a final draft of it. We plan to go final before the end of the month. When we do go final, we will submit the report to Drew and have it distributed to the committee. So that report should be out shortly. I know that I think at the last meeting, we had tentatively scheduled for March 19th as the next meeting. So I know the agenda we'll talk about later, but if that's when you want to have the next meeting, the single audit compliance report will be ready to be presented then.
Okay.
With all that out of the way, we will go ahead and talk about the school's report. Some background, the report was finished in draft form in December, presented to the school board. Well, first of all, presented in December to the superintendent and his management team and finance team, presented early January in draft form to the school board, and then submitted to the state, finalized very shortly after that. And then snow happened, and here we are. There's a short governance letter, which is part of your materials. I'm really not going to go over it because it's really boilerplate, as opposed to the Knox County governance letter, where we have accounting estimates, difficult accounting pronouncements to deal with, component units, and many other things. The school board, the internal school funds report is simply, it's very close to a cash basis. It's a modified cash basis. So there's really not any tricky things. And the items of relevance are actually in the audit report itself, which we'll go over shortly. Basically, the opinion, the kind of the combined statements, and the compliance section. So unless there are any questions on the governance letter, I will not.
Well, I noticed in the governance letter, I believe it talks a little bit about which ones you consider
Yes.
Significant deficiencies, and I think one of those actually improved a lot this year from last year. But is there any significance to those being? I don't know how the other ones weren't significant, I guess is what I'd say. The other findings, like items 7 through 10.
Oh, okay. You're talking about the compliance report itself.
Okay,
in
I'm
there.
sorry.
That has more to do with, let me pull that out, where items are bucketed. All 12 are considered significant deficiencies. Let me pull that out. Certain ones are considered internal control or financial
388.
reporting matters, and all of them are considered compliance matters. So on page 388 is where the findings that are considered internal control or financial reporting matters are identified.
Mm-hmm.
And then on page 389 is where findings that are considered compliance issues are identified. And there we list all 12.
Okay.
But it'd be possible, it's possible for them to be listed in either section, but they would ideally be in one section or the other,
Okay.
or both. Okay. Audit report wise, put that away.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Oates. On those 12 findings, are there any that, every year we have a couple of, repeat offenders, if you will, and then a couple that fall off and a couple new ones. Are there ones that are legacy ones that just don't seem to change very much that we really need to focus in on with our education team?
The reality is pretty much almost all of them are legacy ones. With that being said, I think the frequency that we have within the findings is really the critical part, and how many instances, because let's just use negative fund balances for instance. There are years that we've had 3 or less, and for one line item to have a negative fund balance, that for an invoice that comes in towards the end of the year, it's out of all the line items within 90 schools, it's probably, particularly it's a small dollar amount, it's probably not that significant. But there are other years like this year that the number of instances were really high. I want to say there was 19, but we'll get to that, 19. So I like to look at the frequency, and as we go through each finding at time permitting, we'll talk about how many instances there were this year compared to prior years.
Yeah, I was just looking at a chart here from
Page 404 that.
404, the breakdown in it looks like the one that really stands out to me is disbursements of funding that last year was 54 instances and this year it's 73. So while a lot of these are a little higher than last year, a couple lower, that one is significant. And,
Yes.
you know, that's about how do they spend their money and how do they track it? So.
Yeah. Now, let me make two quick other points, and then we'll get into the findings and take whatever time we need on those. First of all, as you read the audit report, which is on page Roman numeral 2 or PDF page 6, it's a strange audit report, but it's that by state regulations. This is audit reports in accordance with the state manual for internal school funds, because it basically says this report is not in accordance with U.S. GAAP, but it's not in accordance because it's required to be on a different or regulatory basis of accounting. So don't let that throw you off as if you're looking at the audit report. The audit report is the standard expected report for an internal school funds report. So, and then I'd like to briefly go over on page 1, PDF page 9, I guess it's really the next page, page 2. Total assets are a little bit over 15 million through all the 90 schools. That's cash, basically. There's a couple miscellaneous receivables in there, but roughly cash is a little bit over 15 million. And and then there's a breakdown of equity. But the other side, that's cash as of June 30th, 2023. Then 2 pages later on, well, pages 3 and 4 summarize the revenues, expenditures, transfers by schools. But on page 4, PDF page 12, if you look at the second and third columns, the revenues and expenditures, as far as funds that are coming in and out of the schools, 23.7 million were the revenues, 22.3 million were expenditures. So, you know, several things of relevance there as we evaluate the controls here is that, you know, a lot of small transactions, but the schools are holding 15 million in total at the end of the year, and, you know, 22 million, 23 million, nearly 24 million of dollars are coming through the schools. So I think it's always good to keep that in perspective and why the state wants these funds audited. Okay. Without any more comments on that, I'll go to the findings unless there are any questions. Kind of as an overview here, one positive is 2 critical findings to me, which would be numbers 1, segregation of duty, and number 11, funds not receipted through internal school funds. They went down. Yes, go ahead.
Would you reference a page number, please?
Yes. Finding number 1 starts on page 390. I think it's PDF page 401. And finding number 11 is on page 402. Report page 402. Those are 2 of the findings I consider the most significant. One, because everything starts with segregation of duties. If there's no checks and balances in place, then your control is not control structure is not set up as ideally as you'd like it to be. We had significant decrease in schools that did not have an ideal segregation of duties, down to 49 schools. There were 28 schools higher a year ago, so 77, I guess, a year ago. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these that have lack of segregation of duties are smaller schools, elementary schools, some middle schools, for instance, just because you have very limited personnel. When you get to a high school, your controls are typically a little bit better because you have more office personnel to assist. But still, that's been a focal area of the schools, and it's encouraging that at least the checks and balances part improved during the year. And on page 402, finding number 11, funds not received through internal school funds. This was identified cases where teachers or administrators received funds directly. Generally means they're using Venmo or something like that to collect money for schools. Problem is, Venmo accounts are not typically tied to your own personal bank account. So technically then, money's being collected for the school or going through a personal bank account before they ideally are turned back over to the school. So that's an area of concern, one that we've raised, and we didn't have a lot of instances noted during the year. That's the good side. The bad side in this report, or at least the areas that we had significantly increased findings, were really in the documentation side, whether it's purchase orders, and for reference, let's say disbursements, which is finding number 3 on page 39, starting on 392. Receipts on page 394, and purchase orders on 396. These 3 areas, we had a significant increase in number of findings. For instance, disbursements, we had 73 schools with a finding in this area. In the bullet points there, we have about 7 bullet points, or what a finding would represent. In the condition, when I'm talking about findings and circumstances, the kind of the write-up of the finding is generally in the condition paragraph. So look through this.
And
So,
Ted,
yes.
I appreciate you kind of grouping these together as to how you see them, but maybe if we could just go through
One
each
to one?
one generally
Okay.
and
That'd be fine.
maybe touch on, of course, y'all have heard my opinions on this before. I wish there was some way we could, with you all or help, figure out a way to give more attention to this. I don't have any concerns about the folks administering all this and looking over it, and particularly with Garrett's a lot of work that he puts into it. But I kind of want it for the record, and I just because this is just an ongoing answer, and I don't know how we get there. And I looked at some of the management responses. I didn't go back and compare, are they the same ones, or are we trying to improve on them? And I'm glad to see some have gotten better. I realize y'all are up against the wall with being able to have maybe either the right number of people or the right people administering some of this, and it's under the control of the school principals usually, who have other duties for these people to be doing. So, but let's just go through them and briefly, what the issue is, and
Sure.
to give us something on that.
Okay. All right, then back to the beginning of the findings. I'm on page 390, report page 390, PDF page 401, I believe. Segregation of duties. This is an area where there was improvement. We had, I believe, 77 schools with this finding in FY22, dropped to 49 schools in FY23. 49 is not ideal, but I think it's also, like I said, believe more of the smaller schools, and I'm encouraged to see improvement in checks and balances.
I know you somewhere have a probably matrix of which schools are which on these, and is this one more, let me put that in reverse. Are the high schools better at this than the smaller schools?
Generally, the high schools are better collectively as a whole because you have more personnel. You have more office personnel.
Generally, okay. Okay.
Okay. And as information, because you did bring up the subject, understandably, yes, Garrett receives a breakdown of which schools, which finding,
Right.
and he tracks that as well. We disclose it to the schools and they track it. Okay.
And I'm okay with that. I don't think, we haven't really wanted to make that an issue by school in this meeting, which schools weren't doing as well, and that just gets into some different issues, so, but I appreciate your point there.
Any other questions on number one? Okay. Number two is negative fund balances. And this area had a significant increase during the year. We had 19 schools that had at least one funding line that had a negative fund balance. And for threshold, we used greater than $10. Obviously, that's a low threshold, but some of the funds do not run a lot of money into them, and still their responsibility to clean up at the end of the year. And like I said, this is up significantly. Well, it's up from 7 schools the year before.
I've got a question, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When you say in excess of $10, what was the highest amount that they didn't have they were running in the negative then?
There were some that were in a few $1,000s, and generally that related to like a late invoice coming in, maybe for a yearbook that wasn't properly accounted for.
Okay, so mainly human error?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right.
Okay. Next one.
Finding number 3 is on disbursements. And in disbursements, this starts the run of 3 that I consider to be the documentation areas. We had 73 schools that had an exception, at least one exception. That's up from 54 schools the year before. And exceptions identified in those 7 bullet points that are listed below. And generally it's like checks not having 2 signatures, invoices not properly canceled, something of that nature. No supporting invoice, that happens a lot.
Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Thank you. So when there were not 2 signatures on the school check, the bank still processed the payment?
Banks are generally going to process with just 1. So that is the challenge for the effectiveness of a 2 signature requirement. It's going to take some internal review as well. Of course, after the fact, it's kind of late, but you could still denote after the fact that a second person did approve this disbursement.
Okay, and then there were 73 schools that had problems. How many of those schools do you think didn't do the checks properly? Half of them, 3/4 of them? Would you guess?
I would say the most common exception here would be lack of supporting documentation, but there were several that didn't do the checks properly as well.
Okay.
Probably up to half.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Then I'll move on to number 4, 2 pages later. I'm on page 394 now. Receipts, we had 61 schools that had an exception. One of the 6 bullet points listed in the condition section, that's up from 56. So an increase, not an alarming increase, but still an increase. And this would include receipts coded to an improper account or no documentation. Or no documentation of a restriction on a receipt.
I have another
You also
question.
have the 3-day rule as well in play here.
Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
problem.
On the 5th one down of the conditions where it says that the makeup of cash and checks per bank deposit ticket did not agree to the supporting documentation. Please tell me that was just a one-time issue.
I know that this was not 61 instances, okay? This was one of the, it happened a few times, but not many.
Okay.
And sometimes that's also a result of collections from a teacher and not tying out to the log or something of that nature.
All right.
All right. Number 5, it's on page, 2 more pages, page 396, purchase orders. For the last, what I consider the documentation matters. We had 64 schools that had an exception to the purchase order procedures. That's up from 51 the prior year. And that's where purchase orders not properly issued for a purchase over $100, or purchase orders were completed after the date of the purchase, or certain expenditures exceed the amount of the purchase order. And for follow-up on the last one being certain expenditures exceed the amount on the purchase order, sometimes a purchase order is drafted and someone goes to get something at a store and costs just a little bit more than they anticipated. So that's kind of the background on that.
But is that a predominant one, or to me, I guess the completing it after the date of purchase? Well, I've seen that at a lot of places, but
Yeah, that's the predominant one,
Okay.
and it happens for someone going to the store. So, and that really triggers number 2 or number 3 there. Either they make an estimate of it and
Right.
their estimate's not enough, or, of course, from an ideal control standpoint, they're not going to the store. So,
Matt, do you have a question? I mean,
Yeah. This is, and I think I've mentioned this before. I don't disagree that these are individually documentation type issues, but I do worry and have some concern when you have something like purchase orders and disbursements both, knowing that those two serve to some extent as a control on each other. You have the
Yes.
purchase order, that's controlling your disbursement. If you have your disbursement properly, then it should have the proper authorization on the front end. Is there any part of the testing that's done to isolate anything where the same purchase is hitting both these criterias? Like a single purchase that does not have a purchase order and does not go through the proper disbursement process? That's where I worry, I guess, because just the numbers of them.
we have not tracked that separately, but that's something worth tracking going forward. So, I think it's limited. I don't think it's a widespread situation, but I need to check to be sure.
Yeah, because I get there's going to be, especially when you look back to finding one, the segregation of duties, that
Yes.
That's what we're looking at here. That's the reality. But when it becomes more of a pervasive one purchase going through the entire process,
Yes.
not being caught by any of those controls, that's when I have more concern.
It's a valid point. And I'm going to write a note on that. Okay. Anything else on purchase orders? Okay.
anything else on purchase orders? Okay.
Agreed.
73 schools.
It's high.
Yeah,
Yes.
out of what, it's 94, right?
Low 90s. I'm
Yeah.
not sure the exact number.
I mean, that's
Yes, it's a lot.
75, 80%. So, and purchase orders, 2/3. So,
Yes.
But no, that was the question. So, appreciate it.
Certainly. Number 6 is ticket reconciliations. And here we had an exception regarding ticket reconciliations with 10 schools, which is up from 7 schools the year before. This typically runs between, say, 6 and 10 exceptions. So a little bit on the higher side. Of course, you're somewhat at the mercy of your volunteers here, but it's still a challenge. Keep in mind that while 10 doesn't sound as bad as, 90s or 70 some for another finding area, you really don't have a lot of ticket reconciliations for elementary schools or alternative schools. So you're predominantly looking at middle schools and high schools here. So the percentage is actually higher than it might anticipate, that you might infer.
In the instance of high schools, they could, while we've got 10 this year, but one of the schools could have had this happen a number of times. Is there any weight given to that, or is it? I mean, it could be a lot more instances than just the number of schools, correct? And I guess that really applies to all of these, but
It could be, because we're testing on a sample basis and looking at the reconciliations after the fact. So it could be. And this is an area where the controls just aren't as strong. Just you have a lot of volunteer help in the area. So procedures are in place, and record keeping, accountability is in place, reconciliation forms are in place, but they don't always reconcile.
all right.
For what I will say, though, the dollar amounts of reconciliations that are off are not overly alarming considering what we're testing in this area.
Well, that's good to know. All right, thank you. Let's go on to 7.
7 is fundraising, and we lump fundraising and resale activity together here, because resale activity deal with sales tax. 62 schools we had an exception for during the year. That's up from 49 the time before. So the exceptions would include a profit analysis and a profit summary was not prepared for fundraisers at certain schools. That is a requirement before you do a fundraiser, that you evaluated whether the fundraiser is actually going to make money and gets approved. And as well, there are items purchased during the year where sales tax is paid or did not pay on a resale item, or where they paid when they shouldn't have, or didn't pay when they should have. So,
But there are instances where sales tax has to be paid as opposed to a blanket exemption for schools or county, right?
yeah, I believe it's items purchased for resale.
Okay. So it's like a self-reporting sales tax, I guess, okay?
Yes. But the exception criteria are in the condition paragraph.
So to me, fundraising, and I can see how you lump it with resale, but is one of them more predominant in this total of 62? Is it more fundraising or more, I would assume it's more fundraising than resale. I don't know.
It's actually pretty close. I think that there's a fair number of instances in both.
Okay. All right, let's go on.
I was going to say, could I ask one more?
Yes.
I'll get it. The last part on the condition, the director of internal school funds ceased approving fundraisers during 2021.
That's
What
a
is
good point.
What is the process there? I can't tell from the management's response, frankly.
Yes, for a time, fundraisers had to be approved by the Director of Internal School Funds, which is Garrett Radin. That policy, because I think it became too overwhelming on top of everything else, and also the quick turnaround time that was needed. But Garrett could probably answer that better than I could. But that when we go behind the fact and test, that has a lot to do with, I think, as it would imply, the exceptions are probably more so, the increase in exceptions are more so on the fundraising side because of that.
Is the process now that somebody else is approving? Is that accurate?
I'm trying to remember. I'll let Garrett speak to
Okay.
that.
Hey guys, so Garrett Radin, Director of Eventual School Funds for Knox County Schools. So it was a combination of a lot of stuff. Overwhelming, there's about 5,000 fundraisers a year. That does not count school support organizations, so that's another 3,000 to 4,000 at least. So you can see this is probably a full-time position. On top of all that though, that wasn't the problem. It was that they happened after the fact. So let's say, for example, this is just an example, that the band was going to do a fundraiser tomorrow. They forgot to put the form in. They needed my approval today. I was in the middle of something, right? Hit by the bus mentality, something like that.
Yeah.
I couldn't approve it. It happened. Why would I then approve it? Right? So when it says that, it's just being very literal that we ceased that because of common sense protocol reasons. But we are also in the middle of switching services. So we were using SchoolStream, which is the name of the company. I guess I shouldn't use names of companies, but we were using a company, and now we're using another company for that ties it into our finance system and into the SSO operating system. So now it's full functionally. It takes me, I literally have been doing it back there while we were waiting during the ACFR report. So, I mean, if that just tells you it's a lot streamlined.
So the policy is still that you need to
Policy is
approve
still
each one.
there, which
Okay.
it has to be actually, because the state manual, which was updated actually for you guys, just FYI, July 1, it went live. It's now called the Internal School Fund Manual. That manual still calls for the director of schools, so Dr. Reiswick, or his designee, in this case myself, to approve those fundraisers. But I only approve fundraisers at the SSO level and the school general school body level. So for example, a book fair, I would approve. Very rarely would I overstep the principal, right? If at all. Typically it has to do with what's called the marketing. That's what it refers to in the manual, the marketing aspect of the fundraiser. So think of it like they're going to bring in Scholastic tomorrow, but it's right in the middle of coupon book season. I would deny it and say, hey, look, coupon books are going on right now. Let's wait till 2 weeks from now, right? So I approve, just for conversation's sake, I approve school support organization fundraisers and the general school body fundraisers. So let's say a baseball team wanted to do a golf tournament. I don't see those, nor does the manual require for me to see those. That was some of the language adaption there,
Yeah,
getting
that-
us more in line with that.
That's helpful. I was trying to clarify from
Yeah,
what the
absolutely.
language is, and
Absolutely.
what was expected versus
Yeah, the
what.
policies never necessarily changed. We just were trying to reassess how the policy interacted with the internal school fund manual and the people doing it on the procedure side.
Yeah.
So, yeah, great question.
I would hope you're not having to individually approve all 3,000.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks, Garrett. I guess we can go on to number 9, Ted, unless you've got anything else to say.
We were on number 8, school support organizations next. This is very similar to a year ago, and kind of Garrett just somewhat touched on it as well. But these are identifying how many known school support organizations have approval, but there are many that are not approved. Question?
I'm sorry, you're correct. I was skipping over that one. Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the condition listings, it doesn't appear that management's response addressed the first sentence under the condition.
True, it really is looking going forward as opposed to addressing the SSO listing.
But I mean, they've apparently for 4 years, I guess, 4 to 5 years, then they haven't moved forward with their software or whatever to get that listed on the Knox County Schools website. Is that the way I'm reading that?
I'll let Garrett, he can speak more directly on that.
Will you repeat your question?
Under the condition of number 8 finding, it says that since 2019, Knox County Schools has not included all the school support organizations on the Knox County Schools website. And in the management response, they didn't address that I can see. And I'm wondering, what's the status? Are you going to list those on the Knox County Schools website, or are you not?
So they are active. So tough question. Great question, but a hard one to answer. Okay, so the exact answer is this. We won't know what we don't know. So if an organization doesn't tell us about that they exist, we won't know it. So for example, the list has always been published, but no one was approved, and that's the actual fact. So from 2019 through present day, there was a decrease of roughly 280% of who got approved every year. So what the manual is stating here and what the condition refers to is that I have to annually post, the director of schools or his or her designee has to publish annually the approved organizations. So it's a play on words. So the reason it wasn't published is because it wasn't actually approved. So for 19, 20, 21, 22, COVID was in there too. So just keep those in mind. We did not have any approved SSOs, school support organizations. Okay. As of today, it's just under 12. And it is published because we have some. So there are 12. If you were to go to our website, it's knoxschools.org/Sam Oscar, SSO. On the left-hand side, approved organizations, you'll see them. And there's roughly 12 that show up as completed.
Well, and just to kind of take this a step further, so is this why if you go to the different schools, you can, when it says like community organizations, some of the schools list that they do have a PTA or a PTSO, and other ones do not list that they even exists at that school, even though they do have one.
That's correct. Yes. So if they have not made us aware of it, meaning when I ask, hey, principals, do you have any school support organizations? Maybe the principals, and please don't take my words out of context here, the principal may not even know, right? Our principals change quite frequently. So if Garrett becomes the principal at typical high school, then Garrett doesn't have any history at that school. Therefore, he may not know what SSOs are. And I mean, just for conversation's sake, we add and delete from that list probably monthly, if not greater than that, every couple weeks. I know I've added 2 in the past 2 weeks.
Okay.
So we're only ever going to know what we know. Right. And so currently approximately 230 is very, very close to accurate. I believe it's if you have a website or computer, you can see the numbers at the bottom. I believe it's 234 is what the number is. So yeah, but no, a great question again. But again, that's what we got.
I understand.
So, and we currently use that software that's mentioned in the management response that also strengthened that, which was a reason we pushed for that 2 years ago. Just took a hot minute to get it established. And I think that's another reason why we're having less people interact with it, but this should help. So for just more information than you're asking, we have the ability to communicate with them directly now without the principals. So if Ted moves from president to his kid graduates and now it's another Joe Bob or Sally Sue, then now that person's job is to install the next person in the leadership, like flow chart, and then I have their email address.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as follow-up, we may look at tweaking how we present that next year. Because it's, the concern there are the SSOs that are not registered. That's the concern. There are other factors in it as well, but, okay. All right. If no other questions, we'll go on to number 9. Approval of transfers. And here, these are transactions that basically are approved often by the director of internal schools. So there's a control challenge. We noted 32 schools or did not have the right documentation. 32 schools with an exception, down from 40 schools with an exception. Any questions on this one?
Commissioner Schoonmaker, any question?
Okay. Then I'll go to number 10. Unclaimed property. This generally are checks greater than a year old, still listed on bank recs and not turned over to the state of Tennessee as its cheats property. We had 9 schools with exceptions here, which is the same number as the prior year.
Do you know if it's the same schools?
I'm not sure, probably some of the same schools. But I'm pretty sure there was some change over in this. Some resolved, some unresolved.
Just got a quick question again. So
Yeah.
the Department of Treasury would be responsible for, that's how that money would go. Is Knox County Schools showing up on a list with the Department of Treasury that they're not following procedures, or is just a common occurrence?
They're expected to turn it over to the state, and then the state's responsible for finding the owner of those funds.
But since they did it last year, they had problems with this last year, are we now on the, are we on a list someplace with the Department of Treasury in the state of Tennessee?
Probably not unless they did an audit and
Okay.
had a lot of exceptions.
Okay.
On the scheme of things, compared to other findings, I would consider this less significant. All right. Number 11, again, funds not receipted through internal school funds. Talked about this briefly from the start. This is generally when funds are collected by a teacher and not turned into the school, or they are collected through Venmo, which is tied to a teacher's bank account. But we only had 2 schools with instances, which is noted at least, which is down from the prior year. So not a lot of instances, but by the same token, this is also one I wouldn't be surprised to go up, just how transactions occur nowadays. It's an education thing. So, no questions. We'll go on to number 12, which is travel policy. And here, this is a matter of following travel policies. We had 8 schools with exception. That's actually down from 13 the prior year. And it really deals with properly completing travel-related forms, required forms prior to the trip. So it's more of a documentation matter. But again, it's an area that did improve during the year. And
That was kind of one of the things that I always thought was interesting when I first became a member of Audit Committee, because Knox County Schools had hired a outside consultant to teach the people, particularly in the cafeteria division, And the amount of errors and going on trips without authorization always amazed me. And I guess you keep thinking that this is going to get down to zero, but I guess we're closely going in that direction, hopefully.
It's fluctuated up and down, but yes, and with that in mind, you turn over to the next page, which is the summary of prior year findings where we note that they're repeated. Some of these are really never going to go away from the context of we have 90 schools, and for them never to be an exception with a supporting invoice, for instance, and all the testing we do, it's probably not going to happen. But there are some with really good controls like negative fund balances, travel policy, unclaimed property that could go away. So there are some that can go away and some that just would not, but we'd still like to see the number of instances decline.
Any other comments?
Yes. On all the 12 occurrences, did one individual with Knox County Schools write the management's response?
I know the management response from the schools was drafted, I believe drafted by one person, reviewed, or drafted by one or two people, but also reviewed by several people. So
who sent in the final copy?
the final copy I received from Garrett, but it wasn't just Garrett drafting it and no one else looking at it.
Okay, so the majority of the responses were written by Garrett then?
All of them, yes, were
Yes.
written by Garrett, but
Okay.
they were still approved
Okay,
by school management.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
Well, on that note, I feel Garrett's probably the one that would probably have the most insight to a lot of this and what's caused them and maybe what to try to do to correct it, given the fact that we know some of these may never go away, so.
Well, and I'll add this on the documentation ones, the receipts, purchase orders, so forth, disbursements. I do think part of the challenge is the continued turnover, what the pay rates are for bookkeepers and the resulting turnover from that, or someone wanting to be there for a year or two while their child is there, but then would move somewhere else. I think we have a fewer number of bookkeepers who have been there for a long period of time, who know all the processes to follow. And, I know many of you have been in elementary schools, and the person who's a bookkeeper is also an office manager of sorts or administrative secretary, and it's only a small part of their job. So, and they're often are hired in that regard, that they're multiple duties, multiple responsibilities, but not just focused on finance or accounting or controls.
In general, any other comments from anybody on this report? I appreciate everything y'all did and Garrett putting together the responses and everything else. I don't know how we get away from a lot of this, and we've talked about it before, and I had some comments that y'all have mentioned some things at other meetings. I don't know what else we could do. There's so many other important things going on with the schools and everything else, principals and everything else. Some of them aren't going to consider these things as important as a lot of other issues with students and everything else. So I don't know how we get to make this better. And I guess the real question is, how concerned should we be? I feel like we've not helped enough to make this a little more somehow correctable. And I'm not sure what can be done. I don't know what the Board of Education thinks about your presentation. I know sometimes they have a few questions, sometimes they just I think they accept that this is part of the problem. I mean, or part of something that's not going to change. So I don't know where we go from here other than
Yeah, generally do not get many questions at that presentation. However, I do meet individually every year with the school board chair, and we do have detailed discussions then, and also meet with the superintendent, his finance team, and there are involved discussions there as well. So there are at least discussions, but by the same token, there doesn't seem to be any easy answers
are you getting
without money.
You're right, and money is one of the issues. Do you get a feeling that they have some concern about it, these items?
There's no doubt that they have concern
Good.
about them. It's just a matter of how to fix it. And if you use the current structure, it would require more money. If you want to do something different, you'd have to go to, as I know Garrett has presented before, potentially just having a group of people who go to the schools and just that's all they handle. But again, that takes money too, and
Right.
that FTE at the school who's doing bookkeeping is also doing other things. So
Right.
it's a complicated question. It's not an easy thing to resolve. So the best that they've done over time has been really education. I know there's several meetings a year with the bookkeepers regarding how to process. But we just had a year where we had, I would consider, at least from a documentation standpoint, more findings than typical.
I see Ron's coming up behind you there. So.
Go ahead, let Ron.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, committee members. I will say too that while it can be very frustrating. Ron McPherson, Knox County Schools. Yeah, it can be very frustrating because we see these things over and over. It doesn't mean that we're not always trying to find solutions, though, right?
Right.
We never want to be in a position that's like, well, it just is what it is. We can't do anything about it. So there's a couple of things. One, we formed a staffing committee maybe a year or so ago that consists of principals and regional leaders. And in that staffing committee, we look at positions like teaching positions and the types of teachers and the roles they want to play. That's a part of it. So that was in the initial and through the first year or two. Obviously our focus was on teaching in classrooms and so forth. Right. However, one of our next hurdles is to tackle clerical staffing, right? And what do principals need in that area? Are we staffed with the right personnel? If we need to bolster the school office, how can we do that the most efficient way so that we can have more personnel there? And then number three, we have engaged with a consultant on a very comprehensive salary study, and they're scheduled to give that the report next month at the board meeting. And it's very comprehensive in the sense that they've looked at every position, and that would include school bookkeepers as well. Because what we want to know is, from a market perspective, what are our salaries like in comparison not only to other districts, but it's from an industry average and from a market average. So we're awaiting those results too. And so, if we find that we're really low or out of line on that, I think that's something we have to tackle. We have to tackle that with as much urgency as we would any other positions, whether that's teachers or otherwise. So just wanted to mention that, it can be discouraging in the sense that we see these findings recurring every year, but we never want to be in a position to where we just accept it, right? And I know Garrett is and his folks are always trying to come up with creative solutions as well. And I will say that you'll notice that in those responses, almost everyone is training. When we train bookkeepers, we train school administrators, we train representatives of school support organizations. Sometimes it can be a little bit discouraging if if the participation is not what we would hope, right? But by the same token, we have Garrett's got some individuals on his team that provide as much support as they can to school bookkeepers, and so in a sense, sometimes it's training on a daily basis, and you're right, we have significant turnover there, and then consequently, a good part of your time is then you're having to train again, right? You're having to do one-off type training. So those are some of the challenges that we face, but it's not, we haven't turned a blind eye to it. We're always trying to think of ways to tackle this. And so those are three things on the horizon right now that we're trying to attack this issue with.
Well, great. I wish you the best of luck, and I don't know what, as the audit committee, we could do, but if there's anything we can do to help support arguments for whatever you need or whatever, I think we could certainly, have some input to that. So.
Thank you. And I think this committee's always, in commission and finance committee, have always been very supportive of the school system. We've even, here just recently, we've reached out to Zach and his team, to kind of try to brainstorm, with internal audit, are there some things that we're not thinking of, or is there, and help us think through, to try to be a kind of a thought partner with us as well on maybe some creative ideas that we haven't thought of. And so they've been very helpful and supportive, and so we're going to continue those discussions too.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. Ted, thanks for the presentation. We need to move on. We've got several things to try to cover between now and get out of here a little before 3 at worst. So, Zach, with your group reporting, and I guess Richard's doing the first contract management report, item 7. Let's do that, and then let's see where we stand on the things you'll present after that, and if we need to kind of go through them a little quicker. All right, sir, you're up.
Thanks, sir. Richard Pugh, Knox County Internal Audit. Pleased to report to you guys on our audit on the contract management process. The review was included in fiscal year 23 internal audit plan. So initially, this audit kind of started out as a single contract audit, and then based on risks that we identified, turned into a full-fledged contract management audit. Objectives of the audit are stated to see if contract management was functioning efficiently, effectively, adequately address contract risks, ensured Knox County and its contract partners were following terms of contracts, and achieving objectives of those contracts. Just to give a little background on the kind of contract management process as a whole, it's really a shared responsibility between finance, law department, procurement, and the contract owners themselves, so the departments. And at the onset of this audit, we were trying to figure out what was the best definition for contract, because that can mean a lot of different things. So we pulled the definition straight out of the procurement regulations manual. It's basically an agreement, grant, or order for the procurement, use, or disposal of supplies, services, construction, insurance, real property, and any other item. So a fairly broad definition of what a contract is there. And we attacked that with the goal of, is Knox County contract management functioning effectively and efficiently and adequately addressing contract risks? And we found that generally, yes. We did have one finding related to an up-to-date electronic repository. But for the most part, we found that everything was functioning as it should and efficiently. Our second objective was, does Knox County ensure contract terms are followed and contract objectives are achieved? And yes, we found that contract terms are being followed and achieved. We had one finding related to training, and we'll get more into that when we get to the findings. Just to go through our testing real quick, it was 2 phases. One was contract testing. The other one was contract owner testing. For our contract testing, the main challenge that we faced was to create a universe of all contracts within the county, because we don't have a criteria as a county to have a central database for all contracts, one place that we can look for every contract in the county. It was difficult to compile that universe, so we contacted the law department, finance, procurement, and went through Munis to compile as good a list as we could. But there were still some challenges with that, potential duplicates, the potential that we're not including all contracts in our universe. So therefore, we have a statistical sample there of 42, but we weren't able to make sure that that was considered representative of the entire population, just because of the errors there. But we felt like the 42 contracts that we assessed would give us a good idea on really the state of things, and it would give us a decent assurance on whether things were good or bad. So let's talk about some of the good things from the contract testing side. Was the contract properly executed? Contract operating within a valid period? Commission approval, law department approval, mayoral approval, all those things, 100%. We were thrilled to see that. That just is a testimony to some of the good things that are happening in that shared responsibility, that ecosystem, that, the mayor's office is working well with the law department and is working well with commission. So all that stuff is approved appropriately. So the one portion of our testing was the contract attached in Munis, and we were only able to find 33% of the contracts in our sample in the Munis system. And we'll get a little bit more into that in finding one. So phase 2 of our testing was basically we sent out a questionnaire to all the contract owners to kind of gauge their understanding of the contract, and to understand how much training they received, and kind of did they know the proper processes involved with contract management. So if you look at the questionnaire results on page 3, the first 2 deal with finding 2, and we'll go more over that. But just to point out the really good things that we found in this process, we were able to find owners for 100% of our contracts. So every contract in our sample had someone who was responsible for it. That was very good to see. And then you can also see that 96% of contract owners knew how to resolve issues. 88% knew the terms associated with that contract. And then the second part of that questionnaire was a satisfaction survey geared toward procurement. And the reason we geared it toward procurement is because procurement is generally the contract source for the county, and most departments would deal mainly with them when acquiring a contract or trying to procure goods. So we wanted to get a gauge on that, and we did a 1 to 5 scale, basically, unsatisfied, very unsatisfied to satisfied. And they scored an 83 on our scale, which we felt was a really good score because, there was a lot of 4s in there. So a lot of people were satisfied, and 100% of the respondents to the questionnaire indicated a satisfactory rating of procurement. So I just wanted to give them props on the good job that they're doing, and it translated through the testing. To jump into the findings, just got 2 minor findings. We would say that we don't have a significant finding in these 2 findings. So the finding number 1, lack of comprehensive repository for executed contracts. So like I mentioned, we were only able to find 33% of the contracts in Munis system. So we found 100% of the contracts. So that's kind of misleading a little bit. We found 100% of the contracts, and we found owners for all those contracts. But without a central repository, it kind of creates risks for the county as a whole. Granted, so we're putting a lot of responsibility on the contract owners themselves. So if contracts are misplaced, or it's hard to determine who owns the contract or where the contract is located. So for oversight purposes, it creates a lot of risk on that. And essentially our recommendation for that is for the shared departments, procurement, finance, and Knox County Law Department to come together and come up with formal documented responsibilities of contract storage, organization, creation, and what the acceptable levels of supporting documentation should include. Moving on to finding 2, lack of contract-specific training, and this was primarily came from our questionnaire, so the feedback that we were getting from the contract owners. All the contract owners had good things to say about procurement. The one maybe critique they had was having access to more training pertaining to contracts. And I know that lots of departments within Knox County always want munis training, and contract-specific training was something that that kept coming through on feedback and responses. And for that, we've recommended that Knox County Procurement create a formalized training program to outline kind of the roles and responsibilities of the contract management process. The last thing I'll mention is we had one opportunity for improvement. And so if the discussion goes to the point where we do decide as a county that we want all our contracts in a centralized database, linking the financial information to those contracts would be a good way to reconcile line item transactions to contract terms. So I think that's all I've got for you guys. I appreciate it, and I'll open it up for questions.
Commissioner Schoonmaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make a quick comment. When I first came on commission, I kind of had some preconceived notions about all of the different departments in Knox County government. And one of the preconceived notions was probably our procurement department wasn't really up to speed. I mean, just because you think about procurement and their responsibilities. And when I first sat down with the team and got to meet everybody and understand what they do, that was not an issue. They are very professional, and they've always been very responsive. Whenever I've had a question about a contract, they know exactly what's going on and are always quick to get back. So I'm very impressed with our team over there, and I think they do an outstanding job.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with that statement.
I agree to a large part to that assessment. I haven't had as much dealings with procurement, but anything I have had is top notch, and I think they're really on top of things. So I wasn't surprised with your findings. Since we've got to move on, Matt Myers, do you want to say anything, or would you rather us just leave you alone, seeing as how you got something going on with your arm there?
Matt Myers, Director of Procurement, Knox County Government. Want to thank Zach and his team of Richard, is it Spencer? So I hadn't spent much time with Spencer and Lori. I'll never forget the first time they came over and initiated the contract and management process, and I asked them what the definition was of a contract. And they kind of looked at each other, and then they came back after they had gathered some data. And I said, well, how'd you do? And their jaws just kind of dropped. So I think they finally understood the magnitude of what they were trying to undertake. And there are a lot of moving parts, unfortunately. You know, I don't not work for another government, so I can't speak one way or the other. When procurement's doing their thing and finance is doing their thing and law department's doing their thing, everybody's doing what we're, charged to do. So I think trying to get them all into one repository is going to be extremely hard, but we will work. Charlie Sturkey's already reached out wanting to talk about the finding and see what we can do, and I'll be working with Mike or whoever they put in front of us. We'll be getting with finance next week, Jeff Clark and Chris and Perry, and seeing what we can marry together. But they did do a good job. I think they got a very educational tutoring in Contract 101. I appreciate the kind words. I can control what happens in my office, and I have seen areas of improvement where if we do a solicitation which results in an executed signed document that most likely has come through commission at some point in time, not all of the buyers are attaching that to the contract that Munis creates. So I already have two contract numbers right away. A lot of times there's three. There's two. The one that Munis creates, they'll create a 4-digit. Law department has their numbering system. It's calendar year and then the number after that. So that's the hard part that we face trying to get these together. But I do appreciate it. We've spent a lot of fun time talking about babies and grandbabies and retirement and everything else. Good group Zach has, I want to tell you that.
I don't
Good
know
group.
that they look like they're quite ready for all that yet, like we are, so. All right,
Any
thanks a
questions?
lot, sir.
Thank you all.
All right, Zach, can you, before we go any further, commissioners, what time do y'all need to try to be through with this? You got anything other than I know somebody's got this room at 3.
The room's taken here. 3.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think someone's got the room at 3 anyway. That's why we started at 1, so. All right, Zach.
Sure, Zach Fullerton, Knox County Internal Audit. I do want to point out, we did not do that to Matt's elbow. That was pre-existing. It was not on the auditors. But hope you guys are all doing well. As always, appreciate the committee saving the best for last. I think my update today is sort of mesh between the January update, which obviously we missed, and the current state of affairs. So just bear with me as I power through here. First things first, before I get to the project updates, just wanted to introduce you all to our newest team member. Matt just said his name, Spencer Stanley, waving to the crowd over there. Spencer was working for Pilot Flying J. We stole him away from there, but he also has audit experience with Eastman Chemical and Fraser and Dieter in Nashville. So yeah, it's a unicorn to find someone with actual audit experience. So we're very happy to have him. And hopefully we can keep him for a long time.
Hope so.
For the project updates, in your packet, if you'll look at page 2, I'll start there. That's closed and ongoing projects. Obviously, you just heard about the contract management audit. Happy to see that finalized and out the door. And I know it took a good while, but it is a very challenging topic, as you heard Matt talk about. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces in that arena. So, kudos to Richard for getting it out the door, and thanks to Matt and all of procurement for helping us learn through that process. And then I would also just want to mention, we've definitely changed the format of our reports in the last couple of years. I think they're a little less narrative driven. We rely on graphics, charts, things like that. Hopefully that makes it easier to digest. But if you have any comments about that, let me know. I'm happy to change it back to a narrative style. Hopefully you don't want that, but just wanted to throw that out there. On the second project that's listed there, our operating manual update. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen this before, but we have an internal operating manual. The last time it was revised was in February of 2022. So I felt like now was just a good time to re-engage with it. I sent the new version to all of you in my email last week. If you ever need help at night falling asleep, go to that. Really good for it. But I do think the updates are really important. Obviously, we had some procedural changes in the office after the changeover. And then also the Institute of Internal Audit sort of put forth new standards in January of 24 that go into effect in January of 25, but early adoption is encouraged. So just felt like it was a good time to go back, make sure we're in line with the new professional standards for the profession as a whole.
Now, are those Institute of Internal Auditors things or?
Yeah, IIA. And we're not necessarily beholden to that specifically, but it's just a good guide for the auditing profession as a whole. So wanted to make sure their new standards mirrored our internal practices.
Yeah, we need to, as I recall, the Audit Committee Charter, I think, brings up the fact that y'all will follow those guidelines or standards.
Yeah, I think it specifically points to the yellow book, which is what we build all of our work plans and methodologies off of. So, but yeah, I agree. I mean, we are beholden to both.
As long as you're sort of keeping an eye on that.
Sure. And we always, whenever we do an audit, the first question we ask, where are your policies and procedures? So I would feel unjust asking that if our own internal policies and procedures aren't up to date. So anyway, we had Spencer and I worked on that, and we closed that out. Next, you've got the fleet management program audit. Wendell was leading this audit. As you know, he's since left the department. You can imagine our work is very project focused. So when you're midway through a project and you lose your project lead, the projects can get a little disjointed. It's really a difficult transition, but full confidence that Richard and Spencer can pick it up and keep the work going. We've all been in communication. We were in communication with Wendell before he left. I think it's in a good spot. Hopefully we can just keep it moving forward without a lot of disruption. Then also the last one on the page there on page 2, the Knox County Health Department fee collection. I just wanted to mention Lori's working on that. She's got all the field work done. It's really just waiting on me to do some final reviews. I think she'll probably plan to exit with the health department divisions in the coming weeks. And just to provide a little bit of background on that, I know we don't have much time, but there's sort of major collection divisions in the health department. You've got things like vital statistics, which is birth certificates, death certificates, dental clinics that handle the dental services, environmental health like groundwater, air quality, and then the health clinics. Then on top of that, you have what the health department's finance office does. So when we first said, well, let's just hit it all, maybe you should have scoped it a little bit smaller because there's a lot going on. We were able to we scoped out the health clinics. A lot of their fees are collected through a third party organization. So that gives us some assurance there and a little bit of reduced risk, but still a lot of meat there in vital statistics, dental clinic, environmental health. We're working through that and should have it completed before the March meeting. So if you'll turn to page 3, I wanted to talk a little bit about our upcoming projects. We want to take a look at the Knox County Sheriff's Office IT inventory. I know we've hit the Sheriff's Office a lot over the last few years in terms of inventory, but each time we've done one of these, we've identified a couple of things that could be improved. And this is probably the last in that series of audits, of inventory audits for the Sheriff's Office. So just wanted to cap off that series. We had a pre-planning meeting with Captain Aaron Yarnell. He's the lead of that last week. And then obviously we sent the engagement letter out earlier this week. Hopefully you all received it. I think we've got another meeting scheduled on Tuesday next week. So Richard and Lori are going to work on that. We'll just be looking at their IT inventory that's transitory in nature, laptops, desktops, cell phones, hotspots, things like that. We also have another control risk evaluation that we want to do, the miscellaneous account, which in terms of the budget, it's actually called the non-departmental account. This is one that Andrea had previously pitched. I decided after some more thought, I think it's beneficial to keep it on. Just sort of want to get an understanding of why are things coded to that account and what rules are over that account? Why would you code something there versus a department's account specifically? So Spencer and I got that engagement agreement over to Chris earlier this week. He got it back to us. I've got a Friday afternoon meeting with Jennifer Bodie tomorrow, the budget director, to really start to dig into that. Still, to kick off this year, we want to take a look at the Knox County Schools Fleet Management Program. And you might ask, well, why would you not just do that with the general county government fleet management? Well, it's pretty much two completely and totally separate governance structures. Different risks, different controls, different stakeholders. It just makes more sense to break those apart and do two individual engagements. And then lastly, the risk assessment that I've talked about wanting to do. Goal there really just would be to meet with the stakeholders throughout the county. I've sort of got my contact list ready and look to start scheduling those soon, just to really want to get a pulse on what the biggest issues are in the county. Probably would like to sit down with every audit committee member and get their thoughts on it as well, just where our resources can best be used for fiscal year 2025. If you'll turn to the next page, then we've got the general updates. Obviously, first there, Spencer, I mentioned that. He's joined us now. Also wanted to note there, as I mentioned earlier, Wendell left our department. He accepted a position as the internal audit director for TDOT in Nashville. I did ask Wendell to audit the pothole road maintenance on Interstate 40 in Knoxville. So, hopefully those will be pristine soon. But in all seriousness, I just wish him the best, and I think he'll do good things for TDOT. We got the manager position posted pretty quickly after his departure, or maybe even before he left. I did interviews last week on Valentine's Day, the 14th. Still have some internal discussions. Jim and I were going to meet after this actually and talk about those candidates. But I do expect a decision soon. And then sort of midway through the page there on 4, I think Jim and I thought it might just be a good idea to sort of remind you all about the different positions in the department, because I know I've changed some things around. We've got the county internal auditor, the audit manager, which is currently open. I think ideally at some point down the road, we'd have a senior auditor, but that's currently not budgeted. I do have 2 lead auditor positions, one Richard, one open, and then 2 staff auditors, Spencer and Lori. So look, I mean, I know it's hard for everyone to get qualified employees. That's not just our department. But I'm going to keep working through it until we get all of our budgeted positions filled. I won't hire someone just to fill a seat. I just don't think that that's valuable. So we'll keep looking for the right person. Just quickly, wanted to mention the Dynetics control. That Dynetics is our external IT auditors that we have a contract with. Andrea used them last year. I've continued that relationship. I did sort of a little mini risk assessment with Knox County IT about some of the applications they've developed in-house. Decided on 3. So you've got employee requisition application. That's a smaller app, but it was developed on a framework that they intend to use for larger apps. That's why we picked that one. The Election Commission voter registration app, it's an election year. Public probably wants to make sure that that application and its use is airtight. And then the inmate management system application, which is a very, very large application, a legacy application that was developed many years ago. That's why I picked that.
They have already done this risk assessment, or they are doing it?
Currently doing it now. Yes, sir. They sent me the work work summary breakdown in mid-January. I approved it. We've been actively meeting with IT. It's progressing. They're keeping me in the loop. I've requested actually that project be completed by mid-May so we can discuss it in the June meeting. I've asked that a Dynetics rep be here in June to discuss it with you all. I would think it would have to be an executive session, but obviously they have the more technical knowledge than I do, so I think it'll be valuable for them to be here and be able to present that to you all. A few other items there on the bottom of page 4. Just wanted to mention that we did participate in that UT recruiting event at the beginning of February. I think it was beneficial. Perry and I attended, met a lot of great students who are interested in finance and auditing. I was surprised there was a lot of freshmen and sophomores there in attendance. Not something I was doing as a freshman in undergrad, but kudos to them. I think that's really amazing. I think we collected several resumes. The way I think about it, if you think about it like a business, we, Knox County, we're competing against all the other Knoxville-based companies for talent, right? So Pilot, TVA, ORNL, Clayton, PYA, they all have booths there. Why would we not also have a booth? It's $100 to go and have our face out there. I think the first person that came up to us said, "Oh, I noticed you were on the list this year and you were not on the list last year. So I wanted to come and meet you and just learn a little bit about Knox County finance and Knox County internal audit." So I thought, well, if we just reach that one person, to me, it has value. And then quickly, just want to note that Lori and I are doing the Certified County Financial Officer classes this year. I think a lot of county employees have been involved in those. Richard completed it this past December. Went to the first class in February. Several other Knox County people in there. And it's just good to network with the other county representatives as well, sort of find out what their struggles are. And
I think Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's outstanding. That is spot on what you guys are going to do, because that's a great course, and Mr. Caldwell and Perry can tell you about it as well. But that's great. I'm glad to see that Knox County employees are participating in that program.
Sure. Yeah, I thought the first class was great. I mean, the first class was about general county government. Obviously, I've worked in it, now for several years, but there was some things even I didn't know and that I picked up, and I agree with you 100%. It's a great course. And then just to mention briefly, we've transitioned to the new phone system last week. Just wanted to thank KCIT's telecom team for helping us get through that. If you turn the page with me on page, let's see here, 5 is the proposed audit plan. You basically think about this as just our roadmap for the next 4 to 5 months. If you'll remember, I wanted to get us on a fiscal year schedule, so we'll have another roadmap to present in June to talk about fiscal year 25 of what we want to look at during those 12 months. I think I've covered all of these projects over the last few pages, so I guess I would pause there. I'm not sure if this needs to be approved by the committee or if there's any questions about this particular.
No, I think you just need to keep us apprised of them, and we'll feed you back items as we see them. And
okay, great. So if you turn the page.
Go ahead.
I'm going to jump in just for
Sure,
one
go
second.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Zach,
I know that when you came on, you were very much drinking from a fire hose, and you may be still. As you build out your team, I appreciate the report. It's clear that you guys are getting sort of the house in order while you're continuing the work. I know it's no small task. So we talked on this committee that we know that 2024 is going to be a big transition year to really fine tune it and then continue the work. So we get that you're doing double duty, but I appreciate the extra sort of updates on all the things that are happening inside because we so rarely see you. So I just wanted to point out, I appreciate all these sort of housekeeping items, but they're important because ultimately it's going to be the base for a really dynamic audit department for the next, however long. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, you guys are my boss, so I just view it as I should keep you abreast of when I come in and when I leave and everything that we do in between. So
and they're probably doing all the work.
well, yeah, nobody without your team, right? So on page 6, the control risk evaluations, no changes there. At the bottom of the chart, I just added the 2 that are in progress, the health department and then the non-departmental account. Just listed those as IP in progress. The hotline summary on page 7, if you'll remember, so this dates back to December, right? We had 2 active cases at that time. I was able to close both of those after some investigation. One was determined to be no issues. The other, it sort of had a 2 issues really in one report. For one of those issues, I was able to determine that there was no improper activity had occurred. And for the other issue, I turned over a pretty lengthy report to the appropriate Knox County committee for their review and determination if they want to move it forward.
And just to refresh you, Commissioner, or folks on the audit committee, we had in one of our executive sessions, we talked about that issue. And I've kept up a little bit with how Zach has followed through with that. So just as a reminder, because sometimes we don't always, you can't always spell it out directly in these meetings. So, okay.
Sure. And I think just an ad lib on that a little bit. I think sometimes people look at it, maybe the Knox County Internal Audit's website and say, oh, well, there's only been this many reports out in this month or this window. But there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that don't get reported out publicly, like these investigations that are very time consuming. So just wanted
the hotline wasn't part of internal audit when I first came on, but that had been because of prior changeover before Andrea and everything, and it kind of, it had gotten left, and I can't remember which group, I think it had gone over to risk management or somebody, so we pulled that back into audit a few years back, so. And I think that's been a good place for it, so.
Sure. Okay, the last page, I do want to mention on the hotline, we did get a new one last week. It's open and active, you see it listed there as active. Should be able to finalize that relatively soon. Yeah. And then the final pages are just our recommendations. Of course, I added the 2 new ones from contract management audit. No other changes other than that. So I think that's it for me, but happy to answer any additional questions.
Anything else for Zach? All right, thanks a lot, Zach. Appreciate your crew being here too, so. All right, let's move ahead to the last thing I think we've got to talk about is the next meeting, item 9, and I have on here March 19th, which is a Tuesday. Is that the 9th? I don't know, is that workshop week, the 19th? Do anybody happen to know?
Not for us, it might be 6 council though.
No.
I don't know, there's good. But that wouldn't be till like 5 o'clock. Yeah, that would. Are these at 3 o'clock or 1 o'clock or what o'clock?
But basically, 3 is what everybody had settled on, I thought, in terms of if we went to a different day, don't do it.
Okay, 3 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I couldn't get 3 o'clock for this week, so. So right now, well, I'll leave it at March 19th. I'll confirm that. I was wondering if I did that. I would usually try to still have the same week as either workshop or commission. I'm not sure.
It is work sessions, the 18th.
Okay, the work session is the 18th, so I've got this the day after, which is kind of the trend I've been trying to follow. All right, so with that, is there any other business? Okay. All right, any other business? We don't need to do anything on item 11. We're not going to consider executive session. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn the audit committee.
Ayes had it. So